Hey Seekers, are you tired of losing games in AURY PvP and not getting any ochre while watching other people flex to you how much AURY they get weekly? Do you feel they know something like you don't? Sorry to break it to you, but they do. So let me give you these 5 tips that will take you from a noob to a pro in AURY PvP. Because you've got to understand one thing. The more wins you get, the more ochre you get, which means the more AURY you'll get weekly. So enough of me speaking, let's get into my 5 PvP tips for AURY Seekers of Tokane. The thing with AURY PvP is it's super fun and addictive to play, but the thing is, there's so much strategy when it comes to the battles, and the thing is, it takes you guys a long time to learn everything when it comes to the Neftie's moves, how they're used, and more importantly, how you like to play the game, because every single type of player will have a different type of playing style. So with these 5 tips, this will allow you to finally find your playing style and get yourself from that beginner level all the way up to the top and getting yourself some more ochre, which means more money. My first tip is going to be team building, because in reality this is the core mechanic when it comes to PvP, because you can throw Nefties on a team and just do moves and hope they work, but the thing is, if you build a team with a strategy behind it and have some synergy, it could do so much damage to an opponent, especially when you know how to use it. So when you're making a team, make sure the Nefties you put on your team have a purpose on there and they work together well. So in reality, you can do this in many different ways. So the obvious one is to have like a type synergy. So have a grass Neftie, a fire Neftie and a water Neftie, because the moves they have will counter other Nefties, and because you have 3 different typings, you should hopefully have enough coverage to get yourself some wins. But you also have other type of teams, such as like the curse team when you use a Dino Task, a Aurory and a Goliath, because Dino Task gives out a curse for a long time, and all the other Nefties such as Aurory and Goliath have moves that have extra benefits when your opponent is cursed. So having a team that's built around this one strategy is amazing, because you can get so much things going off. Because if you don't have a team built around it and you just have like a Goliath by itself doing the curse and doing all its buffs as well, it's going to take so long for this Neftie to get going. But if you have a team built around it, it can get going super quick and hopefully, like I keep saying, get you more wins. But the thing is, that's a super niche type of team with one single purpose. But you've got other teams such as like a reactive team, and this team will have like counters, reflects and things like this. So you'll have like a Zoo, for example. Zoo is the obvious kind of like reactive type of Neftie, because if you're really smart when it comes to the game and understand all the Nefties and understand when the player's going to do certain moves, you can use reactive Nefties like Zoo to reflect so much damage back to them and you take none.
Emotional damage!
And these type of comps are super hard to use because you've got to really know what you're doing. But then there's other comps such as like offensive comps, which basically put out so much damage, and if your opponent don't have a way to deal with it, they're gonna die in 1 to 2 turns, because certain Nefties like Bite Bit, Dip King could put out so much damage in 1 to 2 turns. So now you've got like a rough understanding on like the types of teams you can build and the type of synergy you can have with them. Let me give you the core kind of foundations each team needs. So starting off, you've got your lead Neftie, because this Neftie is going to be going in first. So it's got to kind of have a solution to multiple problems, because if you throw it in and it just gets killed in the first turn. So you want a Neftie that has moves that can deal with so many different situations, or have a team that allows you to swap out to bring in another Neftie that's going to do so well in that situation. So your leading Neftie most of the time is going to be a tank like Dino, Sabertooth and things like that. But if you're going with like a Hacks team, it could be a Zoo or a B-Block. But if you're going for like a super hyper offensive team, you could probably go with a Rassi or a Kebab. Like these are kind of like leading Nefties where they're really good at the beginning of the game when your opponent doesn't know what's coming at them. But the other 2 slots, this is where you kind of like build your synergy in your team. So if you had like a Dino, for example, a great way to have synergy would have a bite bit and a recoil. It's got enough typing coverage to deal with everything. And on top of that, Dino's a really slow Neftie, but it's super tanky. And the other two Nefties, the bite bit and the recoil, are super offensive. And they're not very tanky, but they're super fast, which Dino is not. So Dino can set itself up here with hype and allow the other Nefties to go out there and put in damage. But there's one important thing that you have to remember when it comes to team building in Aurory, and that is the first time you use your team, it might not work perfectly, and it might not work perfectly the second time. And the reason for that is that you need to learn what you need to do in every single instance. And I mean, if your Nifty is going up against a Shiba, what do I do then? If my Nifty goes up against a Sabertooth, what should I do then? Because all these different encounters need different type of reactions. And obviously, you've got 3 different Nifties to do something in that instance. So you need to learn when you should do something and when you shouldn't. So don't feel discouraged when you make a team and it don't work straight away. Because sometimes you just need some experience with that team to get yourself some wins. And that means you get more ochre and more money. But now you guys have a rough understanding of team building, it's time to give you my next tip. And that is hype management. Because hype is so important when it comes to battles and the strategies that you can pull off. Because if you've got no hype, you can do no moves. But if you have 20 hype, the world is your oyster, because you can do so many different things and your opponent will be super scared to do anything because they have no idea what type of strategy you're going with. So when I mean hype management, what I mean is don't waste your hype on silly moves when your opponent has like a counter or a reflect, or don't swap out pointlessly, because every time you swap out, you lose half your hype. And that could be super critical, because if your opponent doesn't swap out and just builds hype when you swap out, then they're going to have a hype advantage over you. And I need to tell you guys, your opponent having a hype advantage over you is basically near death for you, because if you swap out, you got 0 hype and your opponent has 20 hype. I said it already. There's so many different paths they can go with, because they can swap out and the next Nifty they got has 10 hype. And every single move in the game has a maximum hype cost of 9 hype. So any Nifty that swaps in with 10 means they can do their big move on you straight away, which could be an OTK for the Nifty you swap out. Or if you don't swap out and your opponent generally just has more hype than you, they can swap in and kill you super easily. But that's what I mean. I'm getting a bit mixed up, because there's so many different things that can happen when it comes to hype management. Because if you're not on point when it comes to building up hype and being selective on when to use it, you're going to lose games super easily, and you're not understanding why. The first obvious one is you need to understand that certain Nifties have counters, dodges, reflects, deflects, and all these moves get around you doing damage to your opponent, and some of these hurt you back. So, and also they don't cost a lot of hype. The maximum counter is 4 hype. So if you're racing a 9 hype move on an opponent and they're not getting any damage done to it, and they dodge you and they hit you back, you're basically in a terrible position in the game. And you're now having an uphill battle because you wasted all your hype, and your opponent now has possibly more health than you, but definitely more hype than you. And this may sound strange, but sometimes not attacking it in a round is the best answer. Because if your opponent has like 10 hype, for example, and it's a number 9, they have 3 chances to counter on you. So if they do it all 3 times, and you're a mastermind and don't attack and build hype all 3 times by either skipping and not attacking, or having your hype move doesn't attack, that doesn't do any damage, so it just builds hype without doing anything. If you have any 2 of these instances are great when you're playing against a counter and a reflect Nifty, because it's your choice to attack. And if you don't attack, they can't counter you, and then they lose hype but you gain hype. So you're understanding this little hype management now, because it's a bit of like give and take. Because obviously you need to use hype to attack, but you also don't want to waste the hype on nothing. And that's the problem sometimes with people. The thing is, there's small little things that you can do to your playing style to increase your winning rate, simply by when your Nifty is low and you know it's going to die, Instead of trying to do a move that could possibly miss, or you're not quick enough, or it counters, instead of doing any of that, just skip. Because when you skip, you get 2 hype, and the 2 hype you get always goes first before any type of move. And getting more hype before you die is critical, because when you die, the hype you've got left goes on to the next Neftie. And you gaining 2 more hype could mean so much when it comes to a battle. I may have confused you guys with all that information, but let me make it super simple for you. Don't waste all your hype on stupid moves. And be careful of Nefties that have counters, reflects, and any way to get around your moves. And don't underestimate just skipping a turn or just gaining hype for a round instead of going all in with an attack. Because sometimes they could waste all their hype trying to get around you while you did absolutely nothing to them but get hype. One last point before I get into my next tip, but don't swap out your Nefties constantly. Like, I'm going to have a point in a minute talking about swapping and it being super key to the game, but because we're talking about hype management here, don't swap out constantly because you're going to constantly lose half of the hype that you built up. And yes, swapping's super key sometimes when it comes to the game, but be careful about over swapping because you're just wasting your hype for absolutely nothing. And every time you swap out, you're also getting hit for an action. So be careful out there. My third tip kind of mixes in with my second tip a little bit. But my third tip is to be unpredictable when you're battling. And also learn every single Neftie within the game. Because even if you don't use it yourself, your opponent is. And if you don't know what it does and how to defeat it, you're just going to lose to it every time. So make sure you've learned as much as you can about every single Neftie. And if you're thinking to yourself, I don't own all the Nefties, so how can I do that? There's resources such as the Neftie app that allows you to read all the moves of the Nefties, their counters, and give you so much information that you need when it comes to playing AURY PvP. When I mean be unpredictable, what I mean is don't be obvious when you attack. Because there's certain moves in the game such as like priority moves where you don't necessarily have to worry about that too much. But like I said in my second tip, there's Nefties out there that have moves that get around your attacks such as reflects and dodges and stuff. So be unpredictable because if you have a 9 hype move and you have 9 hype and then you use it straight away, your opponent's probably going to predict that, and if there's a way for them to get around it, they will. So be unpredictable a little bit because like I said, these 2 points kind of intertwine with each other because if you be unpredictable about when you use your big move, if your opponent counters when you're meant to do your big move and you don't do it, then you still got your hype and you built up hype instead. And that means you can do your big move multiple times and it's harder for your opponent to get around it. One key thing that you need to do is constantly be looking at your opponent's hype because the amount of hype they have comes down to what things they can do in each round. Because if they have a bunch of hype, they can do a bunch of things. But if they have very little hype, they can't do much. So if they're on 2 hype and you have a bunch of hype, this is your key time to kind of go for the attack. But if your opponent has a way to get around your attacks, they're possibly going to do that in one of these actions. So this comes into the situation of don't be obvious when you do your moves because if they only have one chance to counter or reflect on you, make sure they don't do it on the move that you do. And this is what I was saying before. Sometimes passing is the best thing you can do. And sometimes passing can win you the game because your opponent might kill themselves, waste their hype, and there's so many things that can happen shitty from you passing. So you need to learn when to be defensive, when to be offensive, when to go all in, and when to sometimes bluff your opponent into doing things that they didn't want to do, so then you're set up to take them down and get that ochre. My second and third tip kind of like mixed in together, but they needed to be explained separately. But my last 2 tips are super important, and these tips are the reason why you're losing games. My next tip is the stats matter so much when it comes to the Nefties and sometimes their moves. Because you think to yourself, oh, the stats are kind of arbitrary, they don't really matter. Yes, they matter, they don't matter. But I'm telling you now, stats are massive because stats are different when it comes to the star levels of all the Nefties. The numbers I'm about to say aren't correct, but I'm just going to explain it to you in a super simple system. But a 5-star Neftie could have 100% in all their stats. A 4-star Neftie could have a 70% in all their stats. And then a 3-star could have a 50% in all its stats. And you can kind of get that idea of what I'm getting here, where The percentages of the stats come down to the stars of the Nifties. And the thing is, the spread of these stats can be completely random. And with certain Nifties, you really want the spread to go in a certain way. So a Tokane, for example, you really want a high speed stat because its bolt ability uses its speed stat instead of its attack stat, and its bolt ability is super good. So when you're choosing a Tokane to use, you want one with a high stat. So when you're on the market, you really want to shop around because you don't want to go buy a Tokane that has max attack and max health and max defense and 0 in speed, because it's going to be a terrible Nifty to use compared to a Tokane that has 100% in its speed stat. So have a look at the stats of the Nifties, and more importantly, read all the moves of every single Nifty, because like I said, some of the moves will use different stats instead of the attack stat. I use Tokane for the example, but Unicut is another example that uses its defense stat to allow it to double attack. So when you're looking around at your Nifties to buy, or when you're hatching a bunch of Nifties and you've got a selection to choose from, make sure you're picking the ones with the right stats, because stats are super important. And sometimes you could be using really bad Nifties, and this could be costing you games and costing you ochre. And the one stat that's super slept on is speed, because speed determines when a Nifty is going to attack. So if one Nifty has a faster speed than the other Nifty, it will attack first. And speed in a mirror match, when it's like, for example, a Bloomtail versus a Bloomtail, speed is super key in these battles because the stat spread is pretty much going to be the same. But who's got a higher percentage in their speed determines who's going to attack first, and possibly determine who's going to win. So remember, stats are super important when it comes to Aurory PvP. Well Seekers, this is my last and final tip, and to be honest, it's the most important one because it's going to be the one tip that the pros are using against you, and if you're not, you're definitely losing because of it. And that is, you need to master the art of swapping in and out your Nifties, because at the beginning of the game, if you have a type disadvantage, sometimes the best answer is just to swap out. And if you've been using my first tip, which is team building, you'll be able to swap out and have an answer to whatever situation you're in. But if you're not swapping out in a defensive way, you can use it in an offensive way. So if you're using my other tip, which is hype management, you can build up all your hype to a point where you can swap in a Nifty in the second round to put out maximum damage. So if you're using like a Unicut or a Shiba right now, that can generate about 15 to 12 hype in the first round, you can swap out and put out a big damage move from an attacking Nifty such as Rassi, Warpath, and these swap out damage moves can be super big, especially if your opponent is not expecting it. Because if you have the tap advantage and the big move, and they have no way to get around it with like a dodge or a counter, they're gonna die in one turn. So this is what I mean about mastering the art of swapping in and out, because you can use it in a defensive way, such as swapping out when you have a tap disadvantage, or you can use it in an offensive way, which is swapping in a Nifty to have the tap advantage and put out maximum damage. But there's also little things you can do. So if your Nifty is about to die and is on like 10 health, you can swap it out because your opponent is most likely going to try to kill it without using a lot of hype. So if you swap it out and save it for later, you could bring in another Nifty, possibly kill your opponent's Nifty, but this Nifty that you're saving, when your opponent's about to do a big damage move and there's no way for you to get around it, this is a key time for you to swap in this near dead Nifty to take in this big hit, die, and your opponent's wasted all this hype, and your other Nifty you had out got saved. And this is what I mean about mastering the art of swapping in and out, because there's so many different things you can do when it comes to swapping in and out of Nifty, when it comes to strategies and plays within the game. So make sure you're using them well, because like I said before, you lose half your hype every time you swap out. So you want to make sure every time you do it, it's impactful and it's not costing you the game. But also be careful, because if you're going up against a high level player, when prediction is super important, sometimes they're going to predict you swapping out, because a big common thing is to counter reflect or whatever in action 3 round 2, especially if in round 1 you generated a bunch of hype, because it's kind of telegraphing that you're possibly going to go for a big move. And that's what I said about in my previous point about being unpredictable, not doing things in an obvious manner. Because in the high level games, things are happening randomly because everyone's trying to get around each other, trying to make each other lose height for no reason, and trying to make sure when they attack, it hits and it's doing the amount of damage they want. So don't spam swapping out in your Nifties, but also use swapping in and out your Nifties impactful and in ways to win you games, because if you win more games, you win more ochre. If you get more ochre, you get more AURY on Wednesday. Well, that's it guys. Now you know all the important tips to help you go from a noob to a pro in Aurory PvP. So go out there, put it into practice, get some experience out there, and let me know how much ochre you're getting weekly. Because after these tips, I can guarantee it, you're going to get more. But until next time, remember, be a shark in this world, not a whale. And we're going to catch you guys next time.